2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. They once told me to stick to sports, and I didn't listen. And I tell you, this is going to be one of those segments where sports and politics and D.C. and baseball and the Nationals all sort of come together. And been a little while since I've had Chelsea Janes on. She used to be the Washington Nationals beat writer, and the Orioles used to be relevant enough that when they used to get together with the Washington Nationals, I used to care enough to have on Washington Nationals beat writers. But she has moved onward and upward from the toy department onto deeper and darker things. Politics herself. She's been out on the trail on the Democratic race along with Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and others, but making a triumphant return for the World Series. We welcome Chelsea Janes back on. You can follow her out on Twitter at Chelsea_Janes. That's Janes. And at the Washington Post, and boy, you've had some fun the last couple weeks. I mean, I was following along on Twitter, and you sort of marched back, and I remember all the Post writers doing that for hockey a year and a half ago when I was out in Vegas following Barry Trotz. Looked like a pretty fun little red magic carpet ride for everybody involved, including yourself, Chelsea.
Yeah, it was definitely a blast. I was honored to be able to come back and be a part of the World Series after, quite a few years 4 years on the beat. And so it was good to kind of see that all come to fruition and get to see everybody again. That's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience that I will obviously never forget.
Well, the Post is a little different, a little weird in that people go from the hockey beat to the Moscow. And look, I worked in the news industry in the 80s. I worked at the Baltimore Sun. We had, much like the Post does now, we had outposts all over the world where we had correspondents, including Ocean City, where I tried to go in the summer of 1988 and failed miserably. Probably was a good decision by the editors over at the weekend section that they did not put me on that assignment. But moving from baseball to politics, and certain people grow up wanting to do nothing but cover baseball. That was me. All I ever wanted to do was have Ken Rosenthal's gig, and I was his sort of assistant in the 1980s, and I watch him on Fox every night and think of those late-night phone calls from Candlestick Park after the earthquake. But then, he aspired to do that. I aspired to do, radio. You've made an interesting, and I think the people at the Post and the way they treat journalists there, that you can go from sports to news to this to that we are all, varied individuals. But, man, you've taken on two pretty good assignments here. And the move for you and the move back, were you watching baseball the whole time or sort of keeping up with stuff?
Yeah, no, and like you say, I'm very lucky to be able to kind of jump back and forth like I have been. That's been, it's a gift for sure. And I know a lot of places just don't have the ability to do that right now. So that's been really nice. But yeah, as I was out on the trail, I would watch games when I could, and certainly keep up via Twitter and all that stuff. So I was definitely not out of the loop. I wasn't as in as I had been for sure, but especially when it got to late September and then obviously the playoffs, I was pretty much watching every game, but was still surprised to hear that they were going to move me back to the World Series. So I was glad that I was well versed in everything that had been happening, because that was something I didn't expect, and I was very grateful for.
Late into the night, and all of those games happened when I was in Hawaii, right? So I got home between Game 6 and 7. Literally, the morning of Game 7, I got back. I did not watch a lot of it. Literally, it was on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My wife and I were on the beach, and that's the way it was. But the aftermath for me has been very emotional, quite frankly. I mean, Tom Boswell was a guy that I, sidled up with in the press box in the 1990s and literally just wanted to touch, right? When I was a kid, and then know him as a colleague and walked down into the locker room after the Caps won the cup with him. Literally, we were together and talking about Peter Angelos, as we were wont to do from time to time. I've gone back and written tombs about the Peter principles and the Masson money and all of that stuff, and remembering when people told me Washington would never support a baseball team. I'm fascinated by all of this and what it means for my town, right? And you sort of flew into it as a beat writer. I've talked to so many people that never thought the Nationals would exist or the Senators would come back or any of that stuff. And obviously Camden Yards is never going to be full of people from Reston, Virginia ever again wearing Cal Ripken jerseys and whatnot. And the parade sort of is an exclamation of that. And I think everything the Nats have represented on my timeline, quite frankly, over the last couple of weeks, that they're not coming back to Orioles games. But for you with the Nats, what has been the saving grace for you? What made you want to come back? What makes you feel involved in it still after being a beat writer? Were you a Nats fan as a kid or something, or no?
No, I mean, no, definitely not. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I was sort of removed from all of this. I think like anything, if you are around a team or people for that long of a time, and as you know, that when you're on a baseball beat, you spend a lot more time with those people than your family and friends.
Yeah, and it's a soap opera that never ends. It just goes from one city to the next, from one clubhouse. Literally, it really is. It's a sideshow unto itself, and you have to. And when you're in it, it's so different than being a kid who loved baseball cards. Watching these guys try to go out and play 162 games.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And so I think for me, just you just get to care about the people. I definitely I've never really rooted for them as a team. Certainly not since I've covered them, but there are people that you see putting basically their lives into this. And I think in anything, whether it's this or politics or anything, when you see people putting that much on the line and you get to know them and respect them, it's hard not to root for those people to succeed. So I think for me, it was really nice to be there after Game 7 and be able to shake some of those hands and just say, congratulations to people that you get to watch them work really hard every day, and some don't, but the ones that do, you really, it's really nice to be there and just kind of get to see all their work come to fruition.
I only did the champagne thing once. I was young. It was the Atlanta Braves Super Bowl or World Series, I should say. The Deion Sanders McCarver mess that happened in the aftermath of that at Fulton County Stadium. And, I'd always dreamed of doing that as a kid and being in there. And Ryan Klesko showered me and gave me the bottle and drank champagne. I got pictures, the whole deal. It feels almost unsafe these days. The Orioles took my press pass in 2006 after 21 years. I think you famously know that. Your publication has written about it before. But, in 13, 14, 15, when the Orioles were Buck and all that, that was not part of something I wish I was a part of. Did you get involved in any of the hijinks? Did you goggle up and poncho up?
No, I try to stay out of it. I think, that's their space for me. And I just, and it's also just, I don't know, I just always felt a little uncomfortable kind of being in there at those times. But, I mean, I was in there for sure and just kind of tried to dodge as much as I could. But,
well, you covered some of them when they clinched and stuff, right?
Yeah, no, I've had some involuntary soaking for sure. And it's fun. Like, it's fun to be in there. And I just always felt like that was theirs and not mine. I hadn't won anything. So I always try to kind of make sure I stay out in the outskirts. But there's no doubt it's fun and special and unforgettable. And it's always fun to have the pictures of just being in there because, I fully appreciate that there are many people who really would love to be there and don't get the chance. So I try to soak it up as much as possible without getting soaked.
For you on the political side, you're at Chelsea Janes joining us here, former Nationals reporter, now national reporter on campaign issues. You can follow her out at the Washington Post. She came back for the World Series. In following it, I'm not shocked, right? Because we were the Nationals, right? Like I'm the old guy that remembers Larry King and George Will and all the senators and Ted Kennedy and like all of that happening at Camden Yards in the 90s, and Bill Clinton throwing out first pitches and all that stuff when lock 'em up wasn't something that we were serious about, and this guy clearly should be locked up, but that's another story altogether. The political side of how it does intersect, certainly in your town, and how many politically active people are Nationals fans or have adopted the Nationals, that there's certainly some right and left side. That's a place where everybody sort of gathers a little bit. Did you feel all of that, I mean, in covering the team before you went onto the political beat? And I think it might be amped up a little bit more now because, $1,500 to get into games when 3 weeks before it was $20 for the Brewers. My wife and I almost went down because it was a nice night for a playoff game, and we're not going to have any playoff games here anytime soon, Chelsea. So, yeah, I mean, but it felt like the power and the political power and all that stuff sort of comes to a head when they're playing World Series games in Washington for the first time in a century, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you always felt the presence of people, involved in politics there. I think, a lot of times the cameras would pan and John McCain would be standing there with the veterans before he passed away and things like that. You just sort of couldn't avoid it. But I think when the spectacle came of the World Series, it was just so obvious that, so many people there, including the president, were huge. There were going to be a lot of people there. There were going to be a lot of people that wanted to be involved. And I think it certainly was never a kumbaya sort of feel that everyone was there, but it is sort of an interesting middle ground where it's the one topic that not everyone certainly, but that a lot of those power players are interested in and that find fascinating and want to talk about and want to hear about. So it's just kind of an interesting way of it's just an interesting city to be in because of, that dynamic, because there are people who, just, yell at each other all day on TV and then come to the same baseball game and are equally as interested in it. And it doesn't heal anything, it doesn't fix anything, but it's just interesting. And I think it was really evident over those 3 days at Nationals Park that the spectacle had really drawn in some of the biggest, political power players in the country.
She is Chelsea Janes. You can follow her out on Twitter at Chelsea_Janes. She's usually at a Kamala Harris this or Bernie Sanders that, and always in the Washington Post, and was running around with the baseball team for the first time. When did you divorce the baseball team? When did they put you on politics?
I started in politics this January, so not that long ago.
So the Bryce Harper thing, boy, he plays a nice villain, right? Like I was a part of the whole Caps run, and I go back. I covered Barry Trotz in the 1980s when he was a Skipjacks coach. So it was personal for me because of Trotz as much as the Capitals or Ovechkin or any of that stuff. And I participated in a lot of stuff out in Vegas with the Caps, and the Bryce Harper part of the Vegas thing, and then him going and playing in Philadelphia, and now them winning. This is the revenge of Bryce Harper, Philadelphia and all that. This is going to be an interesting little sidelight to all of this, is that there's another part to all of this, as there was, I guess, with Clemens, with the Red Sox and the Yankees, or, players that play in two different places. I don't know if there will be an upcoming rivalry, but Washington now has something Philadelphia wants and Philadelphia had, and obviously that owner up there went through his dark times as well, or their dark times, I should say, and now they've reloaded and spent money and done all that. This is a fun couple of years. I mean, the buses will be passing us here in Baltimore as we lose 110 games again next year. But from a baseball perspective, the Bryce Harper is enemy thing, boy, that's so delicious. I can almost jump on that, and I don't even like the Nationals.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a storyline they will never escape, neither Bryce nor the Nationals. Though I think both would be happy to escape it. I think Bryce probably is ready to just kind of let all of that go. I think, it's just sort of everything's sort of thrust upon him, right? Like, he's a villain, but it's not really his fault that he's a villain. He was just so good at such a young age that, there was always going to be this reputation, and no matter what he did. So it is kind of funny that I think how quickly DC sort of turned on him, but also just that I don't think he wants to have to worry about them either. And so,
hey, Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl here. Now that people are making fun of him, in Denver. I mean, it's like people do forget. I mean, I don't know that they'll ever turn on Ovechkin down there, or Ryan Zimmerman, or hey, Suzuki put on put on the hat of the traitor. You know what I mean? Literally on the deck the other day, right? And Strasburg sort of doesn't shake the hand, and everything's being judged, right? Literally.
Yeah, no doubt. And that was its own little whole little world, that whole White House visit. I think people were surprised about things that weren't super surprising, and just sort of a whole different dynamic. But it is interesting how fickle fans can be. But that being said, I think this team, as this Nationals team, will sort of be the team for years to come, and coming back every 1 year anniversary, 5 year anniversary. They'll be on that field throwing out first pitches for generations. So I think, that's been kind of cool to realize that this is a group that'll be cemented in the minds of people here, and, of kids who bring their kids to games years from now. So it's kind of fun to watch that, but the Harper dynamic will be there for years to come. And it's kind of fun to have that too. I think that's part of the evolution of this team, right? Is that you have heroes and villains that you've, come to know over years and years instead of, a season. And I think that's part of the evolution of the Nats here in DC, and part of what's helping them stick.
Part of me, and you've been attending these rallies, when I see them in red hats, When Trump flies in, it feels like a Hitler hate rally to me every single time. The rhetoric feels like a WWE match where people are holding up signs, and I'm waiting for, Stone Cold Steve to show up from 20 years ago and crotch chops and whatnot. But the lock her up, and now the lock him up, and now Bernie Sanders, you participated this week in an event where that's going on. I mean, sports and politics, right? Like I would think that the sounds that the way it would sound if you were blind and just listened it wouldn't sound all that much different, right? These days, the political rallies and the rhetoric, along with where the line between the WWE and a football game would be.
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, it's loud and it's in some cases angry. In some cases, just just the cheering is explosive. I think it's very similar in some ways, but in others it's extremely different. I think in sports, a lot of the energy is over something that is really important to people, but ultimately, doesn't change their day, right? Like doesn't change their situation. And I think some of the energy you're seeing around politics now has to do with a lot of people feeling like there's some real reasons for it, right?
There's human rights involved, and literally
yeah.
in every conversation, in every way, across every space. Literally, whether it's education, whether it's policy, whether it's policing in my town, and crime, and that's why I've rolled my sleeves up as a 51-year-old and said, you know what, 30 years ago, baseball was all I wanted to talk about, literally, right? And it's not anymore. And I think the people that are involved on both sides, like I am, I love sports. I watch sports. I'm flying to Cincinnati to go to a sporting event this weekend, right? So, but the other side of that is, I do live in a city where there's a lot of issues and where it's impossible to stick away from politics. I mean, as much as you'd like to try, it involves everyone's life, and I think we're all starting to realize that and take that seriously as we ramp up for the next election. What are you seeing out in where you're going, in places because you're mainly going to left side events? I'm sure you talked to a lot of people outside the space of baseball last week in D.C. Probably good to get on a plane and fly out and, for me, land in the middle of Kentucky as I'm doing on Saturday, where there was just a huge event on Tuesday, right? Like, you get out and you feel the temperature when you fly. I felt the temperature in Hawaii 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I've been to some of the president's rallies. I've been to, as you said, a lot of Democratic primary events, and it changes your view. I mean, I think being able to sit and watch sports is awesome. I don't think their role should be diminished. I think, if anything, we should all realize how kind of impressive it is that there's this whole universe where, by and large, some of these differences are able to go away and people are able to find an escape for a bit. But I think being out there, you realize that regardless of what side people are on or who they vote for, they feel the stakes are very real in their life, and they are. And so, I think that creates a different sort of understanding of both the privilege that we have to be able to spend a lot of time watching sports, but also why the stakes are what they are. I think a lot of people spend time sort of ruining the intensity of the political discussion these days, and I think maybe that misses the idea that people are just more aware of what the stakes are and that these things can change their lives. And so that's actually a very encouraging thing to see, that whatever side some of these people are on, it's based on sort of this real notion that things can actually change and votes matter and all these things. So that part's pretty cool to see, and I think it's a time in history that we'll look back on, and whatever your view of it will be, like, it is a time of change. It's a hugely significant time, and it's kind of fitting in that way to have the World Series in D.C. and have to kind of grapple with all these things that you wouldn't normally grapple with in a World Series, right? With it's all kind of coming to a head, and I think that's probably a better sign than a bad one, but it does broaden your perspective, and I don't think I was able to get that broad of a perspective, obviously. Going to a baseball stadium every day, which I love. I would do it again. But it's been really educational for me to kind of listen a lot more than, talk about a baseball game, because there are people out there who are fighting for a lot of different things, and the energy that they bring to that is important and shouldn't be discounted.
Chelsea, keep up the great work. It was great to see you have your Nationals homecoming. I certainly had fun with the Caps run last year and having fun with the Ravens run right now, right? I mean, something the Redskins fans don't have to worry about, but they've had their fun, right? So
Right.
Hey, keep up the great work out on the trail. Get your frequent flyer miles and get some rest. There's a rumor the next 52 weeks are going to be a little rocky, right?
Yeah, I've heard that too. I'm going to try it. Thank you so much for having me.
Always a pleasure. Chelsea Janes joining us here, Nationals national reporter for the Washington Post, once the Nationals reporter for the Washington Post, and coming back and doing the parade thing last week with them. You can find her at Chelsea_Janes, Janes, and at the Washington Post. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram, and always out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. All of our Baltimore positive stuff rocking. Mark Weller this week, Lena Wen next week. We're having Police Commissioner Harrison. Wes Moore joining us on Friday night at State Fair, doing a special happy hour, talking about all sorts of great stuff. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that. Also, Maggie McIntosh joining us at Fadley's this week, and Thuru Vignarajah next Thursday, talking about running Baltimore over the next 4 years. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports and stuff and politics.